Hey guys, welcome to Drawing with Abby. Lineless illustration is a really captivating art style that has this airy, ephemeral feeling to them. But how can we create cool lineless illustrations for ourselves? No, we're not going to be relying on an AI prompt. Instead, we're going to break down how to do lineless illustrations in 5 straightforward steps. Let's go. Like all illustrations, it starts with the sketch. Since we know we won't be doing any inks for this illustrations, we're going to be relying on our sketch to nail down our shapes and our definitions. This means we will be cleaning up our sketch and refining it a little bit more than we might be used to. The extra time and effort you put into your sketch will be critical in making your final illustration look sharp. If you were to move on to the next step with a looser looking sketch, chances are you're gonna get confused and you'll have to spend a lot of time trying to clarify your shapes and silhouettes. So it's super important to clean up your sketch before moving on to the next step. Alright, now that our sketch is looking solid, we'll move on to the flatting of our colors. If you're unfamiliar with the term, flat colors are the defined areas of color for your illustrations. These are general shapes with no rendering applied to them that exist on a separate layer. To do this, we're going to lower the opacity of our sketch layer and create a new layer underneath it. We'll start applying our flat colors to this layer. Now, a lot of people use the lasso tool to outline their shapes and use the paint bucket tool to fill it in. I personally like to use the ink brush tool and increase its smoothness, stabilization attributes to outline the shape and then fill it in with the paint bucket tool. The reason why I do it this way is that I feel like I have a lot more control of how smooth the outlines turn out. Experiment with both techniques and see which one works for you. Regarding the face, I'll create a new layer outside of that flat layer and flatten elements like the eyes, lips, and eyebrows. Separating these elements into their own layer will help our workflow when we get to the shading step of the process. As you can imagine, we're going to get a lot of layers, so it's super important to name your layers to make sure we're well organized and we don't end up getting lost searching for the correct layer to work on. As you're flattening your colors, it's also a good idea to regularly turn off your sketch layer to check if you're defining your shapes well. Even without any line work or rendering, your figure's pose should actually be readable and well defined with just the flats. It looks like we're ready to move on. In this step, it's all about adding shading and rendering. You can go with whatever shading style you like to use. Smooth, airbrushy shading, or a textured shading style. For me, I'm going to keep using my pen brush and go for that cel-shaded look. Now, remember to keep your sketch layer at a lower transparency above all your other layers. Find the flatted layer you want to work on and create a new layer above it. Then use your magic wand tool to select the flatted area you want to work on. For example, we're going to go ahead and select the skin tone area. And then go back to the new layer you've created and start rendering on that layer. When rendering, make sure to use colors that have plenty of contrast from the flats to ensure the shapes and definitions are readable. Remember, we won't have the luxury of lines to help define folds in the character's outfit or shapes in the hair. So we're going to be relying on some strong color choices to help us create some definition. This is where we get to really have fun with this style of illustration. So play around, go nuts, and be brave in your choices. Remember, there's always the undo button. One trick is to use your eraser tool to help carve out and define your shading shapes. By using the same type of brush on both your paintbrush and your eraser tool, you'll have much more control over your rendering, especially in detailed areas. Also, be mindful of how you can use the contrast of your shading to replace what inks would normally do. For example, applying shadow on the neck but not applying any shading on the jawline creates that contrast that helps define separation and shape. Just like in the flattening step, it's a good idea to turn on and off your sketching layer to make sure your illustration is reading well without the guidance of line work. This step is an odd one. We're going to be adding inner lines to our lineless drawing. Yeah, that's right. You heard me. Adding lines to a lineless illustration. Alright, the reason why we're doing this is that there are certain aspects to our illustrations that's kind of difficult to define with our current shading method. For example, the outline of the nose or the nostril, or the crease of the eyelid. We're going to use some delicate lines in these areas to help define those features. We want to make sure we don't overdo this though, and ruin the overall style of the drawing. Reserve those inner lines for just the fine details of important areas and rely on your shading technique to define the majority of your shapes. Honestly, this step is kinda optional. Your illustration should be looking pretty good at this stage. All we're really doing at this step is adding some additional polish to the illustration with the help of some highlights and textures. I like to add some real lining around the figure for this type of illustration. It helps sell the silhouette of the figure and adds just a little bit of pop. Next, I'll be applying some spot or specular highlights to the eyes, nose, and specific areas of the figure. When it comes to textures, I like to focus on adding flat patterns to areas on the outfit to help sell the material. To achieve this, you can use a pattern brush or import patterns above the flatted area and apply a clipping mask so that it just appears where you want it. And here's the final illustration. One of the tricky aspects of this style is knowing how much or how little detail you should add to your rendering. Generally, you want to have simple, clear shapes that are readable, but just add a little hint of detail to imply texture. It takes practice, but it's a lot of fun to experiment with. Honestly, for this illustration, I think I did a little too much in the detail department. If I were to do this all over again, I'd probably try to scale that back just a tad. So, what do you guys think? Is this style of illustration something you can see yourself doing? Do you have any questions about this process? Leave a comment in the section below and let me know. If you guys enjoyed this video, hit that like button. If you want to see more, hit that subscribe button. Until next time, keep drawing.